Hello, happy Monday, and wow, it's spring, it's gorgeous today. Today we're going to talk about pasture maintenance and grazing green grass, but first off, I wanted to sincerely apologize for not posting this video last week. I had an unexpected house guest. My father-in-law came to stay with us for the week, and I thoroughly enjoyed having him, and a few times I kind of procrastinated what I should have been doing and sat and chatted with him rather than getting work done. So I apologize, but here I am now, and I hope you forgive me. So we're gonna get right into pasture maintenance and how to keep your pasture looking great and why that's important. So the first thing I would suggest if you're looking to improve your pastures is to have your soil tested. And proper fertilization is imperative to maintaining high quality forage in pastures. Soil nutrient levels and pH are extremely variable from farm to farm, and actually they're even variable from year to year. When we hear people talk about grapes and wine vintages, we'll hear them talk about, oh, well, you know, the 1993 Chateau Margaux was exquisite, but the 94 was a little harsh in the tannins and this and that and this and that. And what does that is actually something called terroir, and that relates to the climate or the weather that was experienced the previous years, which can change the taste because it's all of the minerals and all of the nutrients that are in those grapes that change the flavor of the wine. And it's exactly the same with forage and things like that. The amount of nutrients that are in it from year to year change depending on the climate, the growing conditions and things like that. Now with grapes, there's a lot more involved where, you know, the winemaker does have a lot to do with it, but the nutrient levels are different for sure, 100%. So it's important to know that. And it's important to know especially your levels of not only your pH level, which is actually the most important thing to know, and I'll explain why, but also there's three nutrients that are very, very important for equine nutrition and for growing grass and forage. So let's talk about pH first. Well, what is pH? pH is just a marker for the level of acidity that is in your soil. So maintaining proper soil pH is essential for healthy forages. And the reason is because if your soil is too acidic, it actually will block the plant's ability to uptake nutrients into its structure. So a pH of 7 is what is considered neutral. A pH greater than 7 is considered basic, and less than 7 is considered acidic. So grass forages perform the best in soils with a pH of between 6 and 7. Excuse me. So acidic soils are detrimental to plant health and productivity because acid conditions limit the availability of the nutrients in the soil to the plant. Lime is something that is used and is very important for farmers in maintaining good levels in their soil, good pH levels in their soil, because lime is basic in nature. Therefore, the application of lime increases the soil pH and makes the nutrients in the soil more available for the plants to uptake into their structure. And that's what's really important. Plants take in nutrients in the form of minerals from the soil, and vitamins actually come from the sun through a process called photosynthesis. There's three primary nutrients that are included in soil test reports that are important for horse forages, and that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And I know you've all heard those terms in talking equine nutrition. So for grasses, nitrogen is a crucial nutrient for the forage quality and growth. Adequate nitrogen is associated with that nice dark leafy green color and vigorous vegetative growth. So if your grass looks pale, excuse me, green or yellowish in color, and it has fairly poor growth, that's a symptom that the nitrogen in your soil might be deficient. And the reason why it's so important for testing to figure out where you're at before you add any kind of fertilizer is that too much nitrogen can actually kill species that are plant species that are very crucial to equine nutrition, those being mostly the legume type like alfalfa, clover, that sort of thing. So we don't want our horses to eat a ton of those things, but we do want a little bit of a mix. It's like us, we don't want to just eat iceberg lettuce. We want a salad with all kinds of different greens in there. So potassium improves the plant's ability to survive periods of stress, such as drought or freezing, winter temperatures and conditions. And potassium deficiency is characterized by poor growth, reduced disease resistance, and reduced winter hardiness. Now, phosphorus is also a vital nutrient, as I mentioned, and it improves the forage quality and also the root development. And root development is crucial in how a plant proliferates the next year, how it grows back. One of the most important things, so I got a little tickle in my throat today. One of the most important things we can do, and one of the easiest things, cost-efficient things we can do, if you can't afford fertilizer and you can only deal with what you can deal with, right, is mowing. Mowing is one of the biggest things you can do for your pasture. So mowing helps maintain a high quality, uniform pasture and promotes tillering, which generates dense leafy vegetation. A side note though, is that if you are cutting your grass, don't ever use grass clippings to feed your horse. That's because as you clip the grass or cut the grass, there are certain gases that are given off while that grass breaks down or dries, and those can actually cause gas colic and great discomfort to your horse, acidosis, or the increase of acid and decrease of pH through the body. So it can cause some other really unpleasant symptoms and side effects too. So just stay away from grass clippings altogether. You don't need a fancy bush hog. You can utilize a grass mower, a push mower, any kind of mower to mow your pastures. As long as you have the time and you're willing to put in the effort, you can have beautiful pastures just with mowing. Mowing limits weeds, and how it does this is that a weed has to grow to a certain height before it can actually flower, and then that flower is pollinated and creates a seed. In the fall, those seeds are released and they're picked up by birds, they're scattered by the wind, those sort of things. Horses brushing against these weeds, and that helps to move the plants around, the seeds around rather, so that those seeds, which have a very strong protein coat, will live in the ground, and then in the spring they will germinate and start to grow again. So if you can cut your weed before it grows to a point where it will flower and seed, you're ahead of the game. It takes a couple of years for this to sort of have a huge impact, but even in 1 year, it can have a very large impact into those weeds rather, reseeding the following year. Forage stores its energy in the base of the plant or the bottom few inches. So mowing too low reduces the plant's energy reserves and their ability to regrow. So when we cut our grass, we don't want to cut it too short. And the sweet spot is actually 3 inches. I don't know if you can see my little thing there, but the sweet spot or the sweet height is 3 inches. When mowing, maintain a forage height of 2 to 3 inches if the pasture is comprised mostly of fine blade short grass species, such as perennial ryegrass or bluegrass. But for taller, higher yielding species such as orchard grass or timothy, you want to mow to maintain a little bit of a higher level, and that's in the range of 3 to 5 inches. So kind of like right in here, so that height. So, you know, that's about the height of one hand, I guess you could say, or to your first knuckle, or however you want to measure, you know, the 3 to 5 inches. The best rule of thumb is to turn your animals onto the pasture when the grass is 7 to 10 inches tall, and allow them to graze it down to 3 to 4 inches, and then rotate them to a new pasture, and let that pasture that's now down to 3 inches rest and regrow. And in that time, it's a great time to do some husbandry where you would go in and pick up the manure. A lot of times what will happen is you'll see pastures that aren't mowed, you'll have what are called lawns and roughs. So you have these lawn areas where the horses have just nibbled it right down to the base. The problem with that, those roughs, or those lawns rather, is that there's not a lot of nutrients left, obviously, because there's not a lot of grass left. But the problem is that, remember that the energy and the good quality nutrients are in that last 3 inches for that grass. And if it's grazed lower than that, it doesn't have that energy to regrow. So those lawn areas over time are going to become less and less nutritive dense, okay? Because they're not, the grass just is not going to grow back. And then we have the roughs, and the roughs are areas of the lawn, or areas of the pasture rather, where the soil might be a little more acidic, and so there's more weeds growing there. The horses don't want to eat those weeds. The horses sometimes will migrate towards those and use them as spots to defecate. And so we want to definitely clean those up. And by mowing all the time and keeping those weeds down, what happens is that over time, it all becomes really nice pasture. So that's what we want to aim for, definitely. So an important thing to know though, if you're dealing with any kind of laminitic horse, sorry, we have a company here today. My 18-year-old kitty cat, Milo, he's so sweet. He's helping me. Anyway, if you have laminitic horses, first of all, always consult with your vet and make sure that they're on board with whatever you're doing. Make sure that they feel it's acceptable for you to graze your laminitic horse or your insulin-resistant horse, Cushing's, metabolic syndrome, those sorts of things. So make sure your vet's on board with that. But higher grass is actually more beneficial because, again, the energy and the calories are stored in that 3 inch and below. So anything above that, optimally for laminitic horses, 7, 8 to 10 inches is the best height for them. And especially if they are wearing a grazing muzzle, because they'll only be able to get the tip parts that have the least amount of sugar in them. So speaking of laminitic horses, a lot of people once thought that it was eating weeds that caused laminitic episodes or colic and things like that. And although eating weeds can definitely cause colic, especially if they're a toxic weed, the latest research doesn't directly link eating weeds to laminitis, but the wide range of non-structural carbohydrates or sugar content within the weed species does suggest that horse owners should control dry lot weeds. Different weeds can hold sugars in different areas of the plant at different amounts at different times of day. So there's just way too many variables. So it's a good course of action to definitely limit weeds in your pasture. So let's talk some more about some things we can do to get rid of weeds. So one thing I alluded to was rotation and rest for pastures. Horses can cause significant damage to pastures, and hooves can cause soil compaction. When the soil is too heavily compacted, the roots actually can't take hold and get enough nitrogen and oxygen to be able to thrive. So when it's really padded down, that's kind of a problem. But also horses that run can trample and shear off pasture plants. So that also, as we know now, can impact how well those plants can grow back. And of course, we talked about how a horse can bite off a plant at ground level, and they tend to graze in the same areas repeatedly and on some plants because of their enhanced nutrition and palatability. But this repeated intense grazing can damage parts of the plants necessary for regrowth and eliminate plants from the pasture that might be vital to your nutritive complex of your horse. So one other thing that's important to know is competition. Competition for space is really important, meaning that if you seed your grass or you seed your pasture and you do consult with your local feed store and you pick a feed seed that is suitable for your location and the species of grass that can grow, those good seeds and good plants can actually weed out the bad weeds. Good overtakes evil always. So definitely go the good route. Get some good seed. Make sure you fertilize before you seed. Don't fertilize after you seed because you will burn your seeds. Herbicides. Some people choose to control weeds with herbicide. Not something that I'm particularly fond of, being sort of more of a natural person, tree hugger. I tend to try to do things the natural way first. But some people do use herbicides, and especially if you have a noxious weed that might be dangerous to your horse. So I had an incident with stinging nettle a few years ago. And herbicide would have been a good course of action there to get rid of those nettles quickly. We ended up cutting them, and then in the following spring we made sure as they were popping up that we got them before they were long enough to seed. So that's my next thing to talk about, is pulling. So pulling needs to happen in spring and fall. Just make sure that if you're pulling your weeds out in the fall, that you're very cautious about where the seeds are scattering as you're cutting and pulling them. You can put a garbage bag over top of a burdock or nettle or whatever, and then cut the base and dispose of it that way. And one thing my dad used to do, which is kind of cool, was burdocks. We had an apple orchard, and burdocks used to grow all around the outside of the apple orchard. So he used to cut them off, and then he'd take a long drill bit and he'd drill right down through the top of the burdock root. So burdock roots, as you know, grow very, very deep, and they're actually very beneficial medicinally in natural health. But when there are so many of them, like especially with your horses, they're a danger to their eyes. You know, if they get a burr in their eye, it can scratch their lens. They're very dangerous to have around, and not to mention they're quite annoying when they're in their coat and their mane. So getting burdocks out, that's a great way to do it, is the drill method, because what happens is over the winter, water seeps down inside the plant root. And as it freezes, it expands and contracts, and this damages the root fiber. So therefore in the spring, it cannot take up nutrients and water to regrow. So that's a good way to do it. People do that with root stumps too, and it works quite well. So that's something you can do in the fall. But again, if you're going to cut or pull, make sure in the spring that there's a certain length that don't have a flower or a seed yet. And so let's talk a minute about harrowing. So harrowing is a really great practice, because one of the things that it's really great at is actually cutting down parasitic load. When your horse defecates and there's a pile of poop, it's very easy for those parasites to live inside those poo balls for a period of time. And actually some zygotes, which are the immature egg form of a parasite, can actually burrow into the soil, and they can last, like Giardia, for example, can last up to 8 years in the soil. So there are lots of parasites that can live quite happily in the soil. So what we want to do is make sure that we break up those mounds of manure so that the parasites are exposed to sun, heat, and air, and that will actually naturally kill them. The nice thing about harrowing is that when it does break up the poo balls and then it rains, it actually just helps them, the nutrients go back into the soil. You can also, if you have the time, like I said, you can go in with a wheelbarrow and pick out your manure, which personally is my favorite way. Just get rid of it. You don't want other horses deciding that it's, you know, might be yummy to eat. So good to get rid of it. So those are my basic steps. That's just basic steps on taking care of your pasture. And the most important part of that is mowing your grass. Definitely mow. I can't stress enough how important it is to mow your grass. Well, let's talk now about green grass, and it's spring, so there's green grass plopping up here now. Who's at risk of having grazing fresh green grass and grass that's high in sugar? And where does the sugar come from, and where is it stored in that plant? So who's at risk? Well, overweight horses and horses that are easy keepers. I'm sure you have a few of them at your barn where, you know, they can kind of live off a handful of hay, some ration balancer, and they're happy as a clam. They're actually more susceptible to insulin spikes than an athletic, regular, everyday, whatever horse. Ponies are also very susceptible to insulin spikes. Horses with metabolic syndrome, Cushing's, that sort of thing. And horses who have foundered in the past or have any kind of digestive issues definitely are susceptible to laminitis and founder colic, things like that, from sugar. So when is sugar high in the grass and why? So sugar or carbohydrates are the highest in immature grass. So that's number one, when it's the highest, is in the spring during regrowth season. So remember, in the fall, the plant sends all its nutrients to the root to be able to survive the winter. And then as soon as the sun starts hitting and the grass, the snow melts and things start warming up a bit, then it starts sending its energy and its calories and nutrients back up the stem of the plant. So those little tiny green blades are the highest in sugar, period. So that regrowth time. Also during periods where it's cool nights and warm days. So a lot of people think that once their grass has sort of turned a little bit brown in the fall, that they're safe and that their horse that has insulin resistance can graze. But unfortunately, if the temperature dips at night, that's a signal for the grass to send more energy to its leaves to help it survive. And so in those times when it's cool at night and warm in the day, so not only in the early spring, but in the fall as well, the sugar can be super high in grass. After a hard freeze, and the reason for this is, again, the grass is trying to survive, and so it's sending more energy into its leaves. Also, after a hard freeze, for the same reasons, and during drought conditions, for again those same reasons. So here's another thing though that's really important to know. During daylight hours, grasses make and store sugars as they take in water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide, which helps them to complete a cycle called photosynthesis. So plants use the sugar to fuel their growth overnight. So they work at making sugar during the day that they can use as energy in the evening at night to then grow more. So plant sugars are highest in late afternoon and lowest in early morning. So a lot of people used to think it was the other way around, that the sugars were higher in the morning and that they were fine in the afternoon. But studies have shown that that's actually backwards. So susceptible horses should graze. So susceptible meaning if they're susceptible to any kind of insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, Cushing's, laminitis, that sort of thing. They should, if it's okay with your vet is king when it comes to laminitic situations or Cushing's or anything like that. The best time for them to graze though is from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. So most of us aren't going to go out at 3 a.m. and turn our laminitic horse out. We might if we live at home and we can't sleep through the night, but just know that those are the best times. That's when the sugar is the lowest. So even if you could only get your metabolic horse out on the grass for, say, a couple hours, maybe like 8 until 10, at least they're getting some really good forage with good nutrients, but the sugar is super low. But again, always consult with your vet. So allowing pasture grasses to become more mature also can help reduce the sugar content and result in less and slower eating. So as I was saying before with metabolic horses, just to make sure that you're at that 7 to 10 inches of height, that's what they should be grazing on. So another thing that you can do is utilize a grazing muzzle, not only in the spring, but in those times of days in the late afternoon. Usually in the summer in the late afternoon, it gets too hot anyway, so good practice is just to bring your horse in for those few hours, say from noon until like 8 or 9 o'clock, and then let them go out overnight. So, excuse me. So that's a good practice as well. Above all though, regardless of the grazing muzzle and the times and things like that, regular exercise. So regular exercise and keeping your horse at a solid 5 body condition score are the best ways to prevent your horse from having issues with green grass. There are also some other things that you can do nutritionally from a functional supplement way that you can help your horse control sugar as well. And I don't want to talk about those openly because unfortunately sometimes people take something and they may utilize it the wrong way. So if you need nutritional help with helping your horse deal with sugars, I'm happy to help you with that as well. So that's something you can reach out to me for. So we're at 26 minutes. I had intended this to be 15, so I'm 10 minutes over. As I always tend to do, I always go over time, but it's been a joy to chat with you today. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and like and subscribe to my page, Tip Top Equestrian Nutrition on Facebook. I also have a YouTube channel where I post all of these videos, so you're welcome to follow along there as well. And if you need me, I'm here for you. Reach out and I'm happy to help. Have a great day. Bye for now.